Hi, this is Yadi Caro, and welcome to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. What makes change happen? I am talking about individual change and transformation. When we say we need to start eating healthier, shifting social media time for books, or even in our teams trying to add new ways of working, how can we make new transformation happen and not just try to build new habits? This is what my guest Jason Hreha discussed today. Jason is a behavioral scientist and entrepreneur who has developed a behavioral strategy framework for business challenges, and he's also the author of Real Change, a book redefining habit formation and personal growth. Today, you will learn about how to build true transformative practices, misconceptions about habits, and a little bit more about behavioral science. Let's listen. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason, for being here with me on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I have a lot of questions for you because, first of all, you're a behavioral scientist, and I want to know what brought you to that field. How do you became interested in that, or was that something you've been wanting to do all your life?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So I actually didn't get interested in the field until high school, my junior year of high school. I went to a unique high school, and we were able to pick our English classes our junior and senior year of school. And I picked a class called Ancient Eastern Thought as my English class. And we read a bunch of Buddhist classics, and I learned all about meditation as part of that. And it's when I started kind of playing around with meditation that I got really interested in the brain, because there's a guy out of the University of Wisconsin named Richard Davidson, and he had been doing MRI studies on monks, looking at how could meditation actually change the structure of the brain. And then I got fascinated by neuroscience, thought, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is what I want to study. So that was the start of everything.
And when you say everything in regards of turning that, because it seems it's a fascinating field, how do you make it into a career, or what were some of the paths that took you to develop it into a career?
Yeah, so I always knew that so from that point in high school, I knew I wanted to study the brain, human behavior, neuroscience. And so I went to Stanford, studied human biology was my major, neuroscience was my specialty. And I was always looking throughout college at how could I actually use this stuff in the real world for practical purposes. And of course, the easy answer for that is go into medicine, right? Because medicine is an applied field looking at kind of how, when things go wrong with the brain, if you're a neurologist or a neurosurgeon or something like that, you can use the knowledge of the brain to solve a practical problem. But I thought that there must be other ways of taking this understanding of human behavior, human thought, and applying it to real world circumstances. And actually, it was near my time of graduation that I encountered the work of this guy, BJ Fogg, who ran a lab that was called the Persuasive Technology Lab at the time. And he later renamed it the Stanford Behavior Design Lab. But after I graduated, actually, I started working with him. And he's the one that really unlocked these ideas in my head of, okay, you can actually take all this knowledge and apply it to product design and to marketing and to instantiating behavior change in complex real world situations. And so from that point forward, I said, okay, cool. I'm going to take all my knowledge, my understanding of what makes us, like how we think, what makes us tick, and apply it to technology design, product design, and business situations the same way he did.
That's fascinating because when it comes to thinking that, product design, what does that specifically refer to in terms of how is it looking at the behavior of consumers, identifying like what people like, or how do you apply that, and in what type of products do you refer to? Could it be like any product, like software, or things along those lines as well?
Yeah, so I got my start working on software, exactly. So web apps, mobile apps. So, I worked in Silicon Valley. So a company would have a website that you could log into, that you could create an account on and do stuff in. So let's say it's a social networking app, or it's a B2B app where you're building productivity software for businesses. These are the types of products that I worked on. And I was most interested in general, what would happen is a company would have a product. People weren't using it as much as they would like them to use it. The company would come to me and say, hey, we have this product, we've created it. we were expecting people to start, to sign up and start using it weekly or daily from that point forward. They signed up, people are churning like crazy. People will use it for a day or two, then they'll never come back. You're a behavioral scientist. Can you help us figure out like why that's happening? And so that's the general type of problem that I would help solve. And to solve that, it's actually very complicated because you have to figure out, okay, what's going on here? Is it the wrong users? Is the product just designed really poorly? Is it too hard? Are we not solving like a real pain point? Are we framing things in a way that's super confusing? So there's so many different ways that a product can go wrong and that it can be bad from a behavior change or a psychological point of view. And so that's like 3/4 of the job is doing this diagnostic process. It's almost actually like medicine in the sense of, a product or a problem comes to you and you have to do just this full diagnostic process to figure out what the disease or the problem is. Once you understand what the disease or the problem is, like treating it is the easy part. The hard part usually is figuring out what's going on.
That's fascinating. And I love to hear that because of the fact that working with multiple development teams that a customer
Yeah,
comes in, requests an application, and they're like, okay, just come up with a solution. And the frustration from the teams in terms of like, why are people not using it? Or like, oh, the realization that people just don't get it, or it's that those frustration, and it comes to that conclusion like, oh, the people just don't get it. But it's way, as you mentioned, it's way complicated issue to address. But I love that you mentioned in terms of all these possible areas that it's to discover and diagnose in terms of why is a product going wrong.
totally.
And now in let's talk a little bit more now in the aspect of your recent book. Before I transition into that discussion about habit and creating changes that actually um, are impactful for the people. I want to know what made you decide that to address that in your book called Real Change: Moving Beyond Habits to Achieve Lasting Transformation. What from the area of product designing into addressing areas of habits? What made you shift into those particular topics?
Yeah, it's a great question. So most of the work that I did in terms of product design, what BJ Fogg would call behavior design, most of the work that I did for the first 8 or 9 years of my career was companies would come to me, as I said before. They said, okay, we have a product, we created it, it's great, people aren't using it, why? And in almost every circumstance, what these companies were asking for was they wanted to make their product habit forming. So they we built this product, we want people to use it every day, every week, every month. We just want people to use it regularly and get a lot of value out of it. And so that's, functionally a habit, right? So all these companies wanted to make their products habit forming. And so that is most of what I spent my time doing, is figuring out how to, at a large scale, get people to form new habits. And so I think that I probably still am, but for a while I was one of the most experienced people in the world, I think, at diagnosing habit problems and then getting people to form new habits at scale. And so that was really my specialty, was trying to figure out, okay, what are the behavioral bottlenecks here? What's going on? Why are people not using this product or this service? And then just, as I said before, running this complete diagnostic. And so I spent a lot of my career doing work on habit formation, getting people, large groups of people, to change their habits, to either break old habits or form new habits. And so I felt like, okay, I have a great practical real world perspective on this. So I understand the academic research, but I also understand, how does this actually work in the real world, in the weeds? And I just get so many questions, or I've gotten so many questions over the years around, hey, I want to start running, or I want to start meditating, or whatever. And would get a lot of questions around this. And what I've found is that my real world experience getting people to form new habits was generally at odds with what people in the popular habit formation self-help books were prescribing. And so what I realized was, okay, I think there's a big disconnect between what's being prescribed, what people are recommending, and what actually works based on my experience. And based on what the science is, actually, I think that most of the habit formation, behavior change books on the market make fundamental scientific errors. And so what I wanted to do was just set the record straight and put forward what I think is a more effective, more scientifically accurate prescription.
And what are those incorrect statements that books and what we hear experts say about habits? What are some of those misconceptions in terms of habit formation?
Well, I think that the big issue, I think, arises from a sloppy use of the word habit itself. So when I'm hanging out with my friends at a coffee shop and we use the word habit, we're just referring to, oh yeah, like any behavior that you do somewhat regularly, right? Any behavior that you repeat. The thing is that in a casual sense, that's a definition of the word habit. The problem is that in the psychological / behavioral science world, habit has a very specific scientific definition. So like a habit is supposed to be a barely conscious or unconscious behavior that is very simple, that's done repeated in the same environment and is triggered by an environmental, like a stable environmental cue, right? So that's more or less that's maybe not the most elegant way of stating it, but that is more or less the scientific definition of a habit. And when you look at academic habit research, it's all around very small, simple, barely conscious behaviors. So for example, a classic example of a habit would be you're walking out of a room, without even thinking about it, you flick off the light switch, right? That's a habit. That habit, actually, habits do not generalize very well because, for example, in my room, the light switch is in a particular location. If I go into a different room, it's going to be in a different location. I can no longer just generalize or habitually do the same motor movement in a new room because the light switch is in a different location. I'm going to have to learn a new habit for that, right? So that's an example of like how small a behavior has to be to really be a habit. Another example would be, let's say you have a glass of water next to your bed. You wake up every morning, first thing you do is just mindlessly reach over, grab the glass of water, sip from it. That's an example of a habit. Once you start getting more complicated than these very simple, small behaviors, you're no longer dealing with habits. You're dealing with goal-directed behavior. You're dealing with actual conscious goal-directed behaviors. And so the big issue is that more or less every single habit book that I'm aware of takes this science around forming mindless, thoughtless little reflexes, and they try to apply it to big, hard, challenging, goal-directed behaviors. So for example, exercise. I'm not aware of a single form of exercise. Maybe walking could fall into this category, but other than walking, I think every single type of exercise it's impossible to make it an actual habit because it's hard. It requires conscious effort, thought. I'm not aware of anybody that ever completely changed their entire set of clothes, put on shoes, and then started running without being consciously aware of it and without that being an effortful goal-driven action. And so the issue is, once again, we're taking the casual definition of the word and then taking science that is attached to the same word, but a completely different definition of the word, and then just misapplying the findings from this definition to this definition, if that makes sense. So the big issue is the tactics, really, once you get into complex goal-driven behaviors, the tactics of habit formation that the scientists have studied, they just don't apply, they don't work. But that's why there's a new habit book every year and people keep reading the new ones because they actually can't form habits with the advice that's being given.
That's I guess, yeah, very true. And reading about this make us feel like we're taking a step forward. So is that what you refer to, for example, going back to that example of, let's say I want to become a swimmer. For me, swimming is like terrible. Like I want to form the habit of swimming every morning. So that wouldn't be necessarily a habit. Is that when you referred in your book like a transformative practice? How would I create something that a quote unquote habit for me that I'm never a swimmer into a swimming habit or practice, I should say?
No, that's a wonderful question. So the distinction that I like to make is that, okay, yes, sipping a glass of water each morning in a barely conscious manner, flipping a light switch when you leave a room, maybe if you put your daily medication next to your sink, just mindlessly taking that every morning with a sip of water, those are habits. That's fine. So, but I make a distinction between those types of mindless, tiny behaviors and then more challenging, goal-directed behaviors that you want to do regularly. I call those practices. So I set up this dichotomy between habits and practices. Habits are, once again, small, really easy. You can do them mindlessly. If you do them in the same context over and over again, yes, they will become basically automatic, like reflexes. These behaviors, practices, they're challenging. I mean, it's that the challenge is kind of inherent in the word practice, right? A practice is something that you're not good at, you want to get better at, you're pushing yourself at to the limits of your abilities to try and get better at something that you're not quite there yet with. And that's like the whole purpose of exercise, right? The whole purpose of exercise is to do something that is hard for your body so that you can stress it out and so that it builds back stronger, right? And so exercise will never be something that you can just turn off your mind and then just do on autopilot, because your body doesn't want to expend that energy. It's really uncomfortable. It's not great. And so you actually have to use willpower, conscious thought, effort in order to push through it. And so that's the dichotomy that I try to set up in the book, is habits, practices. And then I call them transformative practices, because what's the whole purpose of doing hard, grueling behaviors? The whole purpose is to make yourself better or to achieve a hard to get outcome, right? Those are the two reasons that we would do any behavior. And so that's why I call them transformative practices. People read self-help books to transform their lives in some way. And so that's why I put that word on there.
Now, what are good ways to develop a transformative practice? So, where elements need to be there, because it's not as easy as, like putting my shoes in the morning type of thing, or like
Yeah.
wear my bathing suit, and then therefore I will want to do it. So, what are some of the elements that need to be there to develop into a transformative practice?
So the most important thing is picking the right behavior or activity to do in the first place. And that's what I spend a lot of the book talking about. I call it behavioral selection. I call it behavioral selection specifically, but I talk about it in terms of having a behavioral strategy. And so I just, based on all my experience the last 15 years being an applied behavioral scientist the entire time, my experience is that the number one determinant of whether or not somebody does a behavior is whether or not the behavior is the right behavior for them. So I think personalization is key. If you ask a group of 80-year-olds to go on a run every day, it's probably not going to be a great fit, just because of arthritis, knee issues, hip issues, et cetera, right? Not a very good fit. And so I don't care what behavioral science hacks, habit hacks, motivators you give them. I mean, I think everybody can just see very obviously that behavior is not a good fit. It's not a good choice for that target group of people. If you were instead to say, okay, we're going to go on a walk, or we're going to have these individuals do, maybe we have give them a seated, reclined kind of at-home bike that they could go on it each day and get their legs moving or something like that, or some lower impact thing, much better fit. They're much more likely to do that behavior, right? So I think that for each of us, the same thing is true in every area of our lives. And so I think that the trick of getting what you want out of life is picking the right games to play, picking the right behaviors to do, the right activities to do for your goals and the outcomes that you want. And so what I talk about in the book is, what's the whole reason that we do any behavior? Like, we do behaviors in order to achieve outcomes, in order to get results. And so if you want to, let's say, go swimming every day or go running every day, but you're having trouble doing it, my advice is zoom out, ask yourself, okay, why do I want to go swimming every day? What's the whole purpose of this? Is it to increase your cardiovascular fitness? Is it just because you think it's like a fun social activity where you can meet people? Like, what are the reasons? Like, what are the outcomes you're trying to get? Let's zoom. If you're having trouble doing the behavior, zoom out to the outcome level, and then let's think about, what are all the other different activities / behaviors I can do in order to get the same outcome? And I guarantee you, one of those other behaviors is going to be a much better fit for you than swimming, if you're struggling with swimming, let's say. So my whole belief is, it's all about picking the right behavior, and it's also about just testing or experimenting with different behaviors, right? And I think that the trick of life is, I think almost all of us experiment too little. And so we say, oh, running seems to be the hot popular thing. Everybody is going to these running clubs. It's like very popular right now. And people just get stuck on a behavior. And then when they try it and they don't like it, or they can't get themselves to do it consistently, they say, oh man, I'm such a failure. Then they go looking for tactics in books around how can I get myself to do this behavior more often? But that's the total wrong approach. Instead of doing that, obviously it's not a good fit because you're struggling in doing it. So now let's try other stuff. Okay, yeah, if running's not working, try cycling, try rollerblading, try swimming, try whatever. And when you encounter the right behavior, you'll know it because number one, you'll probably really enjoy it. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun. You'll probably think about doing it again after you've done it, and you'll be attracted to it. And if it's like not too inconvenient for you to do that behavior regularly, you'll probably do it consistently. So I have a whole rubric in the book where I talk about, okay, here's how you should think about picking the right behavior for you for a given goal that you have. But I really do think that it's all about just picking the right behavior. Don't mess around with all these hacks and tips and tricks and trying to make a behavior easier, et cetera. Most behaviors, by the way, you can't really make them easier. Like with exercise, it not being easy is the point, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
If it was easy, then it would have no benefit for you, right?
Yeah.
So instead of trying to make it easier, make it smaller, make it simpler, adding reminders, doing these things, which are going to be wildly ineffective and they will not actually help you exercise more, instead pick something painful that you actually find exciting, enjoy, and that is like, convenient enough for you to do, right? So there's a whole process there.
Yeah, that's very true. It's particularly when you place the importance in the outcome that we want to achieve. So if it's like, I could pick up any other activity if I really want to be fit that I actually enjoy and not consider torturing myself in in a specific activity. Now, I'm thinking how to apply this to either teams or organizations, because as you were talking, I'm thinking in terms of as an agile coach, for example, if I have a team that's we're trying to implement like daily status meetings, for example, or daily stand-ups. So what would be it's a new habit for the team. So how do you think about it for organizations? Is this also applicable in that context?
I think it's absolutely applicable. And I think that the key thing is, so a daily stand-up is this is actually, I think it's a good analogy because I do think that within organizations, we don't often spend enough time thinking about our teams and thinking about what would be best for them, or like what, given their personalities, given their strengths and weaknesses, what would be the best thing for them to do. So this daily stand-up is like running in the example I just shared. Oh, I want us to go running. I want us to do a daily stand-up. Oh, I implemented it, or people aren't showing up, or people aren't liking it. Oh man, how do I get them to do the daily stand-up? Well, I would say, okay, what's the purpose of the daily stand-up? What are we trying to get out of it? Is it accountability? Are we trying to increase the team's accountability? Are we trying to get the team more organized? Are we trying to, like, what are we trying to do here? And then based on the individual team that I'm trying to influence, that I'm trying to up level, I would think, okay, are there other ways that we can do this? If I'm worried about disorganization, like not everybody not being on the same page, are we using Jira, Trello, Asana? Are we using some sort of project management software? Maybe that's the issue, actually, that, and maybe we could implement that, and maybe they would like that more. So I would actually zoom out. I would take the same exact strategic approach of saying, I would try the stand-up. If it works, beautiful, we're done. If the team likes it, they show up every day, it solves the problems, good. If they're not showing up every day, if they're complaining about it, if it's not a good fit, then I would do the same exact approach. Zoom out. What's the outcome? What's the goal? And then think of other ways to get to the same place. And I do sincerely believe that for every goal, for every desired outcome, there is a best fit option for a given person or team. And that is just a matter of just being a little bit creative and being exploratory. Once again, trying different things. I think that in life, we almost always stop exploring too early.
Yeah, I love that you say that in terms of that as in our day to day, we should experiment a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, Now that in itself, it's that fear of failing or that how do we change a little bit that mindset of trying to be embracing more the ability to experiment?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer. So, my specialty the last, let's say 8 or 9 years has been specifically around this field called psychometrics, and personality psychology is like a sub area of that field. And so, personality psychology is an area that I've been really fascinated by, and I actually think I think it's the most practically useful area of the behavioral sciences. Actually, I've
Mm,
become thoroughly convinced about that. And I think that the beautiful thing about personality psychology is that it tells us that, no two people are really the same psychologically from a personality perspective. We all are so different, right? And so some people are more fearful, some people are less fearful, some people are much more exploratory and adventurous, others are much more by the book, traditional, routine oriented. Some people love competing against others. Other people hate competing. They just, right? It's like it's the worst thing ever for them. Some people love conflict, some people hate conflict. And so I think that um, the strategy to get somebody to overcome that, let's say, fear of exploration is going to be really dependent on them and their specific psychological / personality makeup. But what I would say is, in general, I think it's possible to, I think for most people, just reminding them, like, hey, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Um, how many options have you tried out? You're trying to lose weight. What have you done? Oh, you tried a diet for a week and you went running 4 times. Do you think you've tried enough things? I think just
mm,
that reminder or that perspective, like zooming out a little bit, giving people that perspective will be enough for a lot of people. I'm not going to say most people, but for a lot of people. For other people who are, let's say, scared of the unknown or scared of trying things that they haven't done before, I think some certain cognitive behavioral techniques could be really helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a very effective way for people to deal with anxieties or fears, et cetera. I think if somebody's a little bit more anxious or a little bit more fearful about the unknown, I think certain CBT techniques could be helpful. I think that for individuals who, let's say, if you say, okay, running's not working, this isn't working, what about going to the gym? If somebody feels, for example, self-conscious because going to the gym, there's all these people there, I don't want to be judged, dealing with self-consciousness, some anxiety around that. Once again, I think some CBT techniques could be good. I guess this is all for me to say that it's very hard for me to give one size fits all advice. What I would recommend, though, is there's a personality model called the Big Five.
yeah.
It's the most empirically backed and good at making predictions personality model, much better than the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So much better than the MBTI, much better than the Enneagram, much better than DISC. I would say that if you take the Big Five, try to take a version that gives you what are called the facets. So not just the Big Five level, but the traits underneath it. If you take that and you look at your profile, it will give you, I'd say, pretty good guidance on what your approach should be. So if you're high in neuroticism, if you're more anxious, then more of these CBT techniques that calm down your anxiety and your fear would be good. If you're, let's say, not extroverted at all, just like very low on extroversion, then I would say, okay, you probably actually don't want to try and necessarily push yourself into doing the hypersocial activities, and just recognize that and be okay with that. And so I think that you can actually personalize it for yourself if you actually have an accurate snapshot of your personality. And what I would say is that I think a very important element to behavior change is, number one, self-awareness and having an accurate picture of who you are, what you like, what you dislike, and what your strengths and weaknesses are. Like, I think just being very honest about that is very important. And I think that accepting that is extremely important. And I think that we get into a lot of trouble with behavior change in life when we don't accept all of our, like us with warts and all, right?
Mm,
So if you're extremely socially anxious, let's say, yeah, don't try and force yourself to go to like the boot camp class or to join a running club. you should say, hey, listen, I'm socially anxious. That's okay. Let me work with that. Let me accept that. And let me actually do things that are more within my comfort zone, more within kind of my natural predispositions. And I think you'll have a much easier time and you'll be a lot less stressed out. And if you want to get over that social anxiety, yes, there's ways to deal with that. But if you don't care about getting over it, then just do things that are just much more in line with kind of your natural way of wanting to do things. And I think that that's like a key element of just getting what you want out of life that most of us overlook.
Absolutely. No, that's great advice in terms of the as individuals, different things will apply to us, and we shouldn't try to adopt what the formula that may have worked for some people, but not
Sure.
for others. And in terms of now, before we go, I do want to ask something in terms of personality assessment. So you're referring to the big five, but
Yeah.
since there's some as people are all obsessed with habits, we are also obsessed with personality assessments. What are some of the misconceptions or things to be aware of when it comes to personality assessments for hiring or for any realization of our own personality? So what are some of the things that we should be aware in terms of those assessments?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the unfortunate thing about the personality assessment field is that most of the assessments out there are fun, but they're either not reliable or they're not valid for predicting important outcomes. So I would say that the only assessment that I really take seriously, there's not one assessment for it. There's a lot of different assessments that have been constructed for it, but the model that I take seriously is the Big Five. The Big Five, I think, is really the only major game in town when it comes to making high stakes decisions. Would feel with a good length Big Five, I feel comfortable making high stakes decisions with that as a key data point. With any of the other assessments, I think they're great as self-reflection tools or as fun exercises. So if you want to think about yourself in a new way, yeah, take the MBTI, take the Enneagram, take any of these assessments, but don't take the results too seriously. Use them as like a fun exercise to get you to think about yourself or a teammate or a problem a little bit differently. But I would not make a high stakes decision based on that data. With the Big Five, I would make a high stakes decision based upon that data. There's so the Big Five is a 5-factor model. So it lays out 5 major personality domains or traits. There's a newer model called the Hexaco where they've done factor analysis and come up with a different trait structure for it. And it's a 6-factor model. That personality model is pretty good as well. There's just it's been around a lot for much less time. And so there aren't as many good long-term studies looking at how well do the results of this test predict long-range life outcomes. So it's not as good as the Big Five, but it's still good. There are models that are kind of built on the Big Five. So, for example, Hogan assessments, they took the Big Five and they've kind of built upon it and like done their own work on it in order to have job-specific personality assessments for hiring, et cetera, based upon that. But my basic guidance would be stick to the Big Five, take the Hexaco. You can take other ones if you want, just for fun or just self-reflection and learning. But if you actually want to use something for hiring or other purposes, I would use the Big Five. I wouldn't really use anything else. And that's more or less my beliefs.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the knowledge that you've shared in terms of really helping us build not habit, but transformative practices and behaviors. So what's the best way for people to reach out to you or just learn more about your work?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so I have a LinkedIn that I try to post on every week, but I'm not always good about that, but I try to. And I have a website, it's thebehavioralscientist.com. And I have, I think, a few hundred articles on there that I've written over the years and a lot of material. So if you just want to read up more on any of my ideas or just keep in touch, you can do that there. And I have a contact form on there as well. So if you want to reach out and talk to me or if you have a question, you can put it there as well.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast, Jason.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.